The active components, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard, have reserve components. Likewise, here in the Golden State, the California National Guard also has a backup organization, and it's called the California State Military Reserve. Hello everyone, glad to have you join us as we welcome Colonel Ken Nielsen to focus. A bit about the Colonel before I start asking him some questions. He has a long and distinguished military career, totaling 38 years as of this year, 2010. He first joined the military back in 1965 in the state of New York. He's had a tour in the Pentagon. He served overseas in Belgium, Germany, and Ukraine. And by the way, while he was in the Ukraine, he was interviewed by KCRA Channel 3. I guess Stan Atkinson anchored that back here in Sacramento. The Colonel retired as a Lieutenant Colonel, or as we used to say in the Army, a light bird, back in 1999 from the California National Guard. He then, the following year, 2000, joined the California State Military Reserve, which I mentioned a moment ago, and he went in as a full bird colonel. And presently, he's the commander of the California Center for Military History, which is the main reason why I asked you to come here today. And he's been in that position since 2004. Thanks for coming, Colonel.
You bet, Steve.
Appreciate
Glad
your
to be here.
Oh, I really appreciate your coming down, especially on a, as state workers would call it, a Furlough Friday.
Furlough Friday.
But I should also mention, and he told me just before we started taping this program, that yesterday was your very last day working for the state.
That's correct, yes.
So
no more Furlough Fridays.
Or as my cat-loving friends would say, Furball Fridays.
That's it.
Let's talk a little bit about the California State Military Reserve, which I mentioned is the backup organization for the California National Guard. And of course, like all states here in California, we have the California Army National Guard and we have the California Air National Guard. And you, as the commander of the California Center for Military History, you are a member of the California State Military Reserve. So tell our audience who are watching right now, what exactly does that backup organization do for the National Guard here in California?
Well, actually, in the military department in California, there's two components. There's the National Guard and the State Military Reserve. And we're what's called a State Defense Force. And there's probably a dozen or more other states that have similar organizations. Our mission basically is to provide support to the National Guard. Most of the SMR units, State Military Reserve units, provide support to the National Guard units when they deploy overseas or have to mobilize for any conflict. They assist those units in training, in getting prepared, in medical evaluations, and so on. The Center for Military History, we have kind of a unique mission, and we're the only unit of its type in any of the state defense forces. There's a few other states that are thinking about creating military history units.
No other state in the United States has a Center for Military History.
That's correct.
Interesting.
The Army and the Army Reserve have some military history units, but we're the only one in a state defense force. And we have kind of a unique mission, and we're actually covered in the California Military and Veterans Code. And we were the second organization created after the headquarters of the State Military Reserve. And our mission is to preserve the military history of the state of California. And so we're not only responsible for the National Guard history, we're actually responsible for the California military history of all the components of the armed forces. So my organization, we actually maintain and gather histories for Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, Coast Guard, and veterans organizations, and so on. So we have really a broad umbrella of responsibility.
So I used to have the 63rd ARCOM down at Los Alamitos, and there was the 351st Civil Affairs Command in the Bay Area. You're responsible for the history of those units as well, even though they're not part of the Guard.
Correct. Any unit that was stationed in California or originated in California, we actually have a responsibility for their history. And so we coordinate with other entities in the armed forces and so on to gather historical information. And when we prepare histories, we cover other components, the Navy and so on, Air Force and whatever. And some books we've actually published do cover the other armed forces.
Are those books posted on the California State Military Museum website?
Yes, they are. Okay. Yeah, and you can purchase them. We've published histories of Camp San Luis Obispo, of one of the original National Guard posts in California, of Camp Roberts, which was a major mobilization center in World War II, and history of San Francisco in World War II, all written by members of my command and published. And yeah, they're available online through the military history, and also available on Amazon. So we'd like to encourage people to buy our books because, yeah.
That website, by the way, if I have this correct, Colonel, is militarymuseum.org.
Correct. That's the California State Military Museum.
And their phone number, by the way, as long as we're giving out information, is 442-2883.
Correct.
Area code 916.
A great museum in Old Town, Sacramento, and if people haven't visited there, they should, to see the military history of California. It's not a real big museum, but it has a lot of artifacts and a lot of items, and terrifically interesting. And we're also the support unit for the museum. Besides our historical responsibility, we provide support to the California Military Museum.
Their address is 1119 2nd Street?
Correct.
And they're at, what would you call that, the south end of 2nd Street?
Yeah, they're at the opposite end of Old Town from the Railroad Museum.
That's correct.
So if you leave the Railroad Museum and head to the other end of Old Town, that's where the Military Museum is, on 2nd Street.
And as long as we're giving out information and putting in some plugs, Dan Sebi is the director, and you have
Correct.
a direct working relationship with him.
Absolutely.
The center and the museum, and you and Dan as well, correct?
Correct, yeah. We assist the museum when they have specific functions, and we also maintain the warehouse where all the artifacts are stored that the museum can't display, and we're responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of all those artifacts and the storage and accountability of that. And we have thousands of artifacts in storage.
The warehouse, is that out where you drill near the Sacramento Army Reserve Center, or is that
Yes,
downtown?
it's out at the B.T. Collins Army Reserve Center at the old Army Depot out near Fruit Ridge. Yep.
It's just down the street from the SPCA, as I recall.
Yes, yeah, they're across the street.
You're on that side, and you're on that side.
Right.
So I'm sure there's some people in the audience of Access Sacramento who have no or little familiarity with the military, unlike you and I. The uniform you're wearing is identical, except for California. It's identical to a uniform that any Army component person would be wearing today. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. As the California State Defense Force, we have to differentiate ourselves from the Army National Guard, and so we wear California here, and they would wear U.S. Army over here. And our shoulder patch is a little distinctive. This is the California shoulder patch, but we have CA for California underneath. And
is that a grizzly bear right there?
Yes, it's a grizzly bear.
And a sunburst behind it?
Right, the rising sun there. Some people say it looks like a porcupine, but that's not what it is. So.
And you have the U.S. flag, the national colors over here?
Yes, correct.
And you know, we might as well just go for it. It's Velcro. And when I first joined the Army back in the 70s, everything was sewn on.
Yes, it was.
So obviously uniforms have evolved in the last
these are actually much nicer uniforms. They're more comfortable than the old camouflage. And they're pretty durable. And like you said, you can remove this when you clean them or whatever. Or when you get promoted, you can tear off your rank here with Velcro and put on the new one. And you don't have to sew it on or pin it on. And so it's, yeah, it's different, but it's a very usable uniform.
And again, just to educate the audience, this is the rank of colonel.
Correct.
And that would be, colonel would be colonel in the Army or colonel in the Air Force and colonel in the Marine Corps, as I recall.
Yes.
But in the Navy, it would be a captain.
Captain in the Navy.
And then that's pay grade 06?
Yes, 06.
I had the pleasure of joining you. I don't know if I should mention that, but what the heck, I will. I joined you and your unit for the drill last month.
Yes. Down
there at the B.T. Collins Reserve Center. And there was a really interesting presentation which kind of relates to one of the artifacts. And the colonel has brought 2 artifacts with him today, by the way, from the museum. But there was a gentleman in your unit, I think he was an NCO, and he was talking about the preservation and maintenance specifically of weapons, which would include, of course, rifles and handguns, etc. Just for the audience at home, shall we go ahead and let them see this rifle that you brought with you and tell me about this?
Well, this is an example of one of the weapons that we have at the museum, and also we have some in storage. This is an M1 Garand rifle. This was the standard infantry rifle of the U.S. Army in World War II, and the U.S. Marines used it too, of course. Over 4 million of these were produced during World War II. The only weapon produced more was the M1 carbine, which was a smaller type rifle weapon. 6 million of those were produced. But this was the standard infantry rifle for the American forces, and General Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever developed. It was a very good rifle. We were the only Army equipped with a semi-automatic rifle. Almost every other army had bolt-action rifles, so this was a significant progress over the old bolt-action, and it would hold 8 rounds, and you could fire 8 rounds as fast as you could pull the trigger.
What kind of ammunition?
30-06 Springfield round it carried. A very reliable weapon. You could get this baby dirty, muddy, whatever, and most of the time it would still fire.
And is this a working model, or is this just...
Yeah, this one is,
okay.
yeah. In our artifact collection, we have automatic weapons, artillery, rifles, pistols, so on. Some of them are active and some are not active. If a museum gets them and they're in operable condition, they're not supposed to deactivate them. And so it just depends what we have in the collection at the museum. But we probably have one of the best firearms collections of military weapons in the entire West Coast.
So this and many other weapons can be seen on display at the museum?
Absolutely. The museum has an outstanding display of weapons going back to the Spanish times in California.
So the beginning of the history of this state, way before statehood.
Yes, yes, right. Exactly. Right up to the modern times.
Now, did your unit, the California Center for Military History, did you restore this weapon?
We do restore weapons. Some of them we get in very good shape. We get weapons donated from police departments, from private individuals, and other military organizations. And some need to be restored. And for instance, we just, we'll let this down, I guess. We just restored a World War I German machine gun that we had on display for Museum Day just a couple of weeks ago, and the public was really interested in seeing that and a lot of questions about it. So one of our missions is to restore artifacts, not just weapons, but uniforms, field gear, things like that for the museum.
I understand that the museum really gets a lot of donations.
Yes.
Do they ever get too many donations? Or
absolutely.
And we don't want to discourage people from donating, but
no,
is there a limit to what the public should donate and not donate?
Yeah, we're looking for more unusual items now because we get a lot of uniforms and you know, more common items, and you can only display so many.
Exactly.
So we have hundreds in storage, and we're going to end up disposing of some of them by sale or donated to other activities.
Do the proceeds go to support the museum when
yes,
you sell those
absolutely.
items?
If we sell any artifacts, it'll go back to the museum to help support it. We can only sell items that are donated to the museum. We have federal artifacts and state artifacts, and of course those stay in perpetuity within the museum system or traded to other Army museums and so on. But privately donated artifacts, yes, we can dispose of those if we don't need them. What we look for are the more unusual items.
What would be an example of an unusual item, or an item that you might be looking for right now?
Let's say someone has a particular sword from way back, Civil War or yonder, or especially flags. If there's any unit flags or flags that any soldier carried, we especially like those in the collection, and so on. Common dress uniforms, we don't need too much of that anymore because we have lots of examples in our storage.
Sort of up to here in
Absolutely,
uniforms.
yeah.
You brought another artifact with you, and
yeah.
I remember when I joined the Army back in '74, which was the tail end of the Vietnam era, we had what was called a steel pot.
Yep.
And I'm sure it wasn't identical, but it did look similar to this. Is this a steel pot?
This is the steel pot. Is
that up high enough? There we go.
This particular one is a World War II steel pot, but these were used all the way up through the Vietnam War. And you can see these in the movies. Later on they had camouflage cover you'd put over this. But in World War II, traditionally they were worn just like this.
With the chin strap hanging down?
Yeah, untied a lot of times. Some units demanded the guys, you know, put them around their chin and hook them up.
And isn't there webbing inside here?
Yes.
As I recall?
Yeah, the steel pot has a liner that comes out. You can see it's removable.
Oh,
and
that's right.
It's kind of a plastic fiberglass type.
Right.
And it had a headband inside and so on, and it actually fit inside here and would snap into place, and wasn't the most comfortable thing to wear for a long period of time, but the steel pot was used by GIs. They'd even cook in this thing and heat it over a stove to heat water, to wash their face or so on. But
so this is about 60 years old?
Yeah, this is a World War II issue one. You can tell by the webbing inside. And
it's got some oxidation on the outside.
Oh yeah, you can see it's got its rust. This is a war veteran. It's seen a lot of service, but not in too bad a shape. But these are the types of artifacts you can see on display at the museum.
Okay.
and so on.
What are the hours of the museum? I believe they're open, they're closed on Mondays, is that
Yes,
correct?
they are. Museums closed on Mondays, open basically the rest of the week. You'd have to check the hours on the website, militarymuseum.org.
Right.
The museum, like all museums, is having financial difficulties. Museums are always at the bottom of, getting funding, and they depend a lot on donations.
And I suppose the Railroad Museum, which you mentioned, does it overshadow the
Oh,
Military
absolutely.
Museum?
Well, the Railroad Museum is a fabulous museum.
It's a world-class museum.
Yeah, it is. And
not to say that the Military Museum is not. It's also a world-class museum.
yes,
in
it
some
is.
way.
It's just one of the lesser-known secrets of Sacramento is the Military Museum.
Or perhaps, as they say, one of the best-kept secrets.
Yeah,
of
best-kept
of
secrets,
of
yeah.
Sacramento.
And we have satellite museums also. If people are traveling around the state, we have smaller satellite museums at Camp Roberts, at Camp San Luis Obispo, and we have there's a library down in Glendale, and so on, that has a lot of historical military books in it, and those all come under the umbrella of the Military Museum. So we help support those activities also.
And you also have a presence in Los Alamitos and San Diego as well.
Yes, we have units there, military history units. So actually, my unit is kind of unusual because most SMR units and National Guard units are in one location, one city, one town. The SMR Center for Military History, we're spread over the entire state of California. I have troops up as far as Eureka and all the way down to San Diego. And so once a year we can get together and meet. It's about all we can do. And
SMR stands for State Military
State
Reserve.
Military Reserve.
Just wanted
yes.
to throw that out there. The State Military Reserve, of which you are a part, is looking for new members, as is your unit, which is called the California Center for Military History.
Yes.
What are the requirements for joining the California State Military Reserve and your unit as well, and what types of occupational specialties are you looking for?
For the Center for Military History, people can get on the website, just Google in State Military Reserve, California, and pull up the State Military Reserve website, and it'll give all the details on the requirements for joining, including the application form.
Do you have to have the same physical requirements as, say,
No.
somebody who just joined and is going to Afghanistan?
No, it's not quite the same as the active component. We're a little less stringent, but you still have to be in fairly decent physical shape and under a certain weight and so on, and not have too many real complicating health issues. But it is easier to get into, and we'll take people who are non-prior service also. You don't ever have to have served in the military. You can join the SMR as a civilian or no service. Up to, I think it's age 60, you can join. And
what kind of job skills are you looking for the people?
in the Center for Military History, what I'm looking for, of course, are historians, librarians, archivists, photographic specialties. We have thousands of photographs that we need to get it, assessed and put on discs or whatever and preserved.
So scanned and
Absolutely.
recreated digitally.
Yes, so photographic specialists would be great. Artifact restorers who work on cloth or canvas, gunsmiths, things like that to help restore the weapons that we have and so on. So any of those types of skills we'd really like to see in the Center for Military History.
How many members, do you have any women, first of all? In your
Yes.
Unit? Okay, and how many members are in your unit total?
There's 75 personnel in the unit right now. I can get up to as many as I want, basically, in the unit, and I have a lot of vacancies. Encourage people who are interested to come forward and then get on the website and see us. If you go on the Military Museum website and there's links.
It's in the left column, isn't it?
In the left column, you see California Center for Military History, and you can click on that.
And that'll have the contact information for
Yes.
A man or woman out there who might want to join your unit, or at least be considered to join.
Right.
And we should mention that there's no compensation generally for this. Is that correct? It's
The State Military
volunteer?
Reserve is a volunteer force, so normally we don't get paid, and that's why I'm so proud of the people that I have, because they volunteer to do things at no pay almost all the time, and put in a lot of hours, and very dedicated people as volunteers. In certain state emergencies or special activities, we would get put on what's called state active duty, and then you get reimbursed.
Would that be like a civil disturbance
Yes.
situation,
Right.
or a possible terrorist attack, or things like that?
Something like that, yeah. SMR people, State Military Reserve folks have been called up before when we've had like Loma Prieta earthquake.
Disasters.
Yeah, disasters, floods, earthquakes, fires, and so on. Or if there's any, terrorism incidents, we could be called up. And then, of course, we'd be paid at the same rank that we hold, just like the active duty people.
Wasn't there someone just following Katrina in the California State Military Reserve who went to Louisiana? I seem to recall.
There were a few selected people who went. Normally, we will not have duty out of the state of California. That's one other thing about the state defense forces. We're not in any federal status, so we cannot be called to active duty and sent overseas, so normally not out of California.
Not going to be going to Afghanistan.
No. The only way we could do that is if we got called back to active duty.
And that would be when things were really rather dire, I suppose.
Yes, right. Especially a guy my age, to call him back in active duty, things would have to be.
I was thinking about Jack Benny. You're probably celebrating an anniversary of your 39th birthday. Something along that line, maybe?
Yeah, actually more than that.
Oh.
But we don't have to go into that.
So 75 in the California Center for Military History. How about how many in the California State Military Reserve statewide?
There's over 700 now.
Over 700.
Yeah. For a state the size of California, we could sure use more folks.
It doesn't sound like a large number for a
No,
state
it
this
isn't.
big.
Considering how many are in the National Guard in the state, I think there's 16 or 18,000.
And only 700 in the
Only
military.
700 of us in the State Military Reserve.
Sounds like it could use a lot more.
Yes, we could. A lot more folks, and it's a lot of fun. It's a great organization. The camaraderie and friends we make.
I noticed that when I was there last month.
Yeah, meet a lot of great people and do a lot of interesting things,
And that reminds me of one thing that I wanted to ask you about also is there's this oral history program. I guess it's centered at the museum, but you've got a couple of people in your unit who go out with camcorders and do scripted interviews. I don't mean scripted in terms of the responses, but scripted in terms of the questions. And they interview veterans, living veterans from all wars. And this is put into a virtual library.
Correct.
Is that called the Online History Program?
Yes. That's part of it. The oral history program is really significant because we're losing so many World War II veterans at such a high rate.
Dying at the rate of about 1,000 a day or something?
At least, probably more now. And to capture the history of these people, everybody has a story, even if they think they didn't really do anything significant. We hear so many interesting stories coming out of these individuals, men and women, who served. And we're constantly sending guys out to try and interview these people and get them. And sometimes we miss. Like we were just going to interview Fess Parker because he served as a Marine in the last year of the war, and he just passed away.
He was 86 or something like that?
Yeah, and so my warrant officer, who does great oral interviews, one of the guys who does them, that was one of the people he was going to interview down in Central California, and Fess Parker just passed away, so we missed.
Are there recruiters for your unit and the State Military Reserve like they have recruiters for the active forces?
Yes.
And is there information on the museum website also by going to the link for the Center for Military History, or is there some other?
You would have to look on the State Military Reserve website and pull that up. You can Google that or whatever, and it'll mention how to join and where the recruiters are. But yes, the SMR has recruiters, but the National Guard recruiters will also refer people to the SMR. So if people can't find an SMR recruiter, any National Guard recruiter can help out.
And they'll do the coordination to get them into the State Military
Reserve.
Oh.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that should be pretty easy to find on the website, a National Guard recruiter.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you'd like to mention about the SMR or the center or the museum that we haven't touched upon? I know that I used to volunteer there from, I think it opened back in '91 at the end of Desert Storm, or as I recall. And I know they have, as you said, a lot of exhibits, thousands of artifacts, but they also have special events from time to time. I was looking at the website the other day, and you have authors come and speak about books that they have written, and then they do book signings.
Yes.
And then on Flag Day, the Army's birthday, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, you also have special events down there. Just tell me a little bit about the book signings and the special events.
Yes, they do. The museum started that in the last couple of years, and it's been pretty successful. Guest speakers and book signings, and also opening up to military-affiliated organizations who would like to hold their meetings at the museum.
Like not maybe Pearl Harbor survivors, but just veterans organizations?
Similar organizations like that, sure.
American Legion,
Yeah,
AMVETS.
and they're welcome to come, and for a small fee they can rent the conference rooms or whatever, and get tours of the museum, whatever, for free. The museum is also looking for civilian docents and volunteers, because with the budget cutbacks and so on, the full-time staff is going to be more limited. So anybody who would like to volunteer and come as a docent for the museum, or volunteer to operate gift shop and so on, the museum would love to get those kinds of people also to help.
And if necessary, they'll train them as well to do,
yes,
do these
absolutely.
volunteer?
Yep, train them to be a docent, train them to operate in the library, whatever is needed. So yeah, the museum is, like you said, it's something a lot of people don't know about, just like the State Military Reserve. I usually get confused as being National Guard or active duty person. When you tell them you're State Military Reserve, they say, "What's that? I never heard of that." So, yep.
So just to repeat one more time here before we wrap things up, it's militarymuseum.org.
Yes.
And then go to the in the left-hand column. There's a link for California Center for Military History.
Absolutely.
And then they could go to the California National Guard website to find the State Military Reserve.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to find a recruiter, talk to a National Guard recruiter, and they'll steer you in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
And the museum again is open Tuesday through Sunday, normal business hours,
Yes.
nominal admission fee, as I recall. And their number is 442-2883 at 1119 2nd Street.
Correct.
So we encourage people to go down there, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Love
Thank
it.
you very much for your time and
Thank
coming
you,
down
Steve.
here. I'm Steve Dakota. That's all the time we have. Our guest has been Colonel Ken Nielsen, Commander of the California Center for Military History. Until next time, thanks for joining us. Bye.